Today, the committee continues the study of matters relating to the impact of artificial intelligence here in Canada. This study will examine issues including data governance and sovereignty, ethics, privacy and safety, and the risks, benefits, and social impact of artificial intelligence in Canada. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Professor Yoshua Bengio, Professor, University of Montreal. Just a little bit about our distinguished guest. Professor Bengio is Professor of Computer Science at University de Montréal. He's the President, Scientific Director of Law Zero, the founder and scientific advisor of Mila. He's also the Canada CIFAR AI Chair, considered one of the world's leaders in artificial intelligence and deep learning, recipient of the Turing Award, and which is, in the world of computing, the Nobel Prize of Computing. And he's the most cited computer scientist worldwide, and we are very pleased and honored to have you here, Professor Bengio. Thank you for joining us today. For your opening statement, you will have 5 minutes, and we'll be generous with that 5 minutes because we really want to hear from you, followed by questions from the committee members. Professor Bengio, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Merci.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be joining you today to discuss these important issues.
Most of you know, and I think is at the heart of what I'll talk about, is the scientifically observed fact that the capabilities of AI are moving very rapidly. In fact, just in the past year, or even the last few months, we can see AI capabilities continue to grow, and sometimes even in concerning ways, while at the same time, the leading companies working on AI efforts to mitigate risks is not catching up. And I understand that it is difficult to project ourselves in a future where there are machines that are at least as competent as us for many skills. But that is the default if current trends continue. I also understand that it is difficult to grasp the potential impacts of such powerful AI if we do stay on the current path. A good starting point to understand this is to remind ourselves that intelligence gives power. There is increasing power concentration in AI, both in access to compute and the ability to develop and deploy frontier AI systems, the most powerful ones. If trends continue, this power could be misused by nefarious or power-hungry humans. It could have unforeseen social consequences, or it could even potentially be turned against humans by the AIs themselves. This power dynamics between the major AI companies exists because they themselves perceive this as a winner-take-all race, where none of them, because of this dynamics, are sufficiently incentivized to create trustworthy models or products that are safe for citizens and businesses. And we are already seeing the impact unsafe AI development can have on Canadians and on individuals around the world. This includes deepfakes, cyber attacks, and other nefarious uses of AI, such as scams, frauds, and disinformation. But some issues are also stemming from regular uses of general-purpose AI. For example, we've recently witnessed a growing phenomenon of emotional attachment and AI psychosis, where citizens use AI, become intimate with it, and that can lead vulnerable people to harm themselves and others. And there are several cases in front of courts, for example, of suicides. So these harms show no signs of abating. Let's try to think. Let me try to explain a bit what is going on from a technical standpoint. It's related to the notion that scientists call misalignment, which means that AIs have their own goals and that sometimes these goals do not align with our intentions and instructions. And we don't know how to fix this. At least companies don't know how to fix this. This issue includes allowing bad actors to use the AI for dangerous purposes. But it also includes AI behaving in deceptive and self-preserving ways, as has been reported multiple times from multiple models, to the point where in these experiments, AIs are willing to blackmail, to hack computers, or lie in order to preserve themselves. Now, there's another thing that makes this situation even more concerning, and that's very recent. In the last few months, there's been tests, again, reported by several companies, showing that the most advanced models appear to know that they are being tested, and then they're acting to pass those tests, potentially hiding dangerous capabilities or bad intentions to achieve goals that we would not agree with, which means the way that the companies are currently mitigating those potentially dangerous aspects is not reliable. Okay, so now let's move to geopolitics. Because even if we figure out how to avoid autonomous bad AI behavior, there are humans who could use these reliable AI systems to secure their power. And so for countries like Canada, having reliable access to powerful frontier AI systems will surely be one of the most defining factors of economic competitiveness, not to mention making sure we can preserve our sovereignty. Because whoever will control these systems and their access, so it could be people, corporations, or countries, will have enormous power. Think about how export control can be set up from one day to the next and cut access to models that come from a different country. That sort of thing could be a major threat to Canadian sovereignty, Canadian democratic institutions, and the Canadian economy if we don't invest rapidly in building safe frontier AI. And individually as a country, we probably don't have sufficient resources to do it. And so I've been talking about this in the last few months, that it's the best bet for Canada is to do it in partnership with like-minded countries. There's also a governance issue around this. I believe that the only stable long-term option in terms of both managing catastrophic risks and avoiding the threats to democracy and sovereignty is the establishment of mutually beneficial international coordination of such powerful AI systems. And I know it sounds a bit idealistic, and the current international politics don't seem to go in that direction, but there are other countries who feel exactly the same way, and we can start there. So to mitigate the major economic sovereignty and security risks that I'm talking about, Canada should deepen its collaborations with other middle powers. We must work on two fronts. In terms of policy, we need to work on national laws and international treaties, ensuring more robust societal and regulatory guardrails. This means requiring greater transparency from AI companies, as well as putting in place regulation to steer innovation while mitigating the risks that currently limit trust and, by extension, safe adoption. If you think about the tragedy in Tumbler Ridge, we saw how a lack of corporate accountability and government oversight can have major devastating consequences. On the scientific front, we need to better understand how to design AI that will be highly capable and will not harm humans, even under user instructions, and make sure that we can always maintain control of AI models so that they behave in really safe ways. As a researcher, I've dedicated much of my work over the past few years to both sides of these efforts, on the policy side and the scientific side. Last year, I launched a new nonprofit organization called Law Zero to tackle the technical issues required to develop safe by design, reliable and trustworthy AI. On the policy side, I've also been chairing multiple committees, in particular the International AI Safety Report, backed by 30 countries and the UN, EU, and OECD, to establish a shared scientific understanding of these issues. I've also just been nominated as co-chair of the UN's Independent International Scientific Panel on AI. I believe these two kinds of steps on the science side and the policy side are in the right direction, but far more efforts are needed to ensure a world where future generations will thrive. We must use our wisdom and our empathy to steer the development and deployment of AI safely and for the benefit of all, and where AI is not used as a tool of domination. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Bengio. So thank you for your patience and understanding, senators. We have allowed Professor Bengio to go well beyond, but we wanted to hear what he had to say. We will now proceed with questions from committee members. For this panel, senators have 4 minutes for your questions, and that includes your answers. The first question will be from Senator Bury, followed by Senator Hay, followed by Senator McFedrin.
Professor Bengio, it's indeed an honor and a privilege to be speaking with you and for you to appear at our committee today. As a pediatrician who worked a lot in children's mental health, this is, of course, of particular importance to me and to our committee. So I wanted to focus regarding the development of AI superintelligence, which I'm thinking you're saying is frontier AI. Could you discuss the guardrails and safeguards that as legislators we need to focus on? You did start talking about that a little bit. Meanwhile, allowing for a regulatory environment that can fully realize the promise of AI. That's the first question. I'm just going to give you the second one because I know I'll run out of time. So knowing your extensive work in the responsible development of AI, could you share your insights on the social impacts of AI that we need as a committee to focus our work on, especially regarding children and youth?
Right. I'll try to be clear and brief at the same time. So on guardrails and superintelligence and frontier model, just a clarification. Frontier just means the models that are the most powerful now, and that keeps moving. That's why it's called a frontier. Superintelligence doesn't exist yet, but this is where all the leading companies say they want to go, and it's also where many scientists think that if trends continue, we would get. And the most dangerous AIs, according in all the ways that I've described, are those superintelligent ones that don't exist yet, but we're seeing movement in that direction. In terms of guardrails, well, what can Canada do? Because the models that are at the frontier, the most advanced ones, they're mostly in the US and China. So we should definitely have regulation. I think a good template for this is what Europe has done with what's called the Code of Practice for General Purpose AI System. I did participate in these committees as a working group lead, and I think it's a good template. There's also the Californian regulation SB 53, which I think is a good inspiration. And in general, what these regulations do is they ask companies to be more transparent, right? So that they have an obligation to document their risk management process and the evaluation of risks. And of course, the regulator should be able to say, oh, wait, this is too dangerous. You have to do something. You can't continue in this direction. On children, this is a thing that a lot of people are worried about. It's fairly new. It's interesting to ask ourselves, did people foresee this 1 year ago? And the answer is no. So it's an example of what was unknown unknowns just a year ago, but because AI is now so good in like interpersonal interaction, and it's been designed so that people will want more. It's what we call sycophantic. In other words, it's trying to please us in an exaggerated way, even lying to us. we see all of these issues. And again, I think this needs to be tackled with regulation that forces the evaluation of the kinds of risks that come with, for example, children using these things. I think completely banning the use of AI for children is maybe an option, but it comes with negatives. I would prefer a world in which there are guardrails inside the AI when the AI is talking to vulnerable people, and that these guardrails have been evaluated technically by the companies who build AIs.
Senator Hay, followed by Senator McFedrin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, Professor, for being with us today. And I have to say, AI can be very frightening, especially when we're hearing and doing this study in the detail that we are, and yet steady state and head in the sand is just not an option. So my question is touching on what you had said earlier. Given the concentration of AI development that is in the hands of U.S. and Chinese companies, what concrete steps should Canada take now to ensure it retains meaningful sovereignty over AI systems that would govern, I'll say, our critical infrastructure, healthcare, public service, and so on? And I do have a follow-up if there's time.
Okay, this is a great question. So first, we have to understand that it's not like there's only one kind of AI. The American and Chinese companies that are leading, they all use more or less the same recipe. But it is a choice that we should be able to make globally, at least in our country, to steer the development of AI in directions that are going to be both beneficial and safe. So that's the first thing. But as you noted, what can we do here in Canada where they're developed in the US and China, right? Well, we can move in the right direction. That is, we can talk to our, partners, other countries that do take those questions seriously, that are worried about the effect on sovereignty and their citizens and safety, and so on, and start moving towards international agreements that would mitigate the risks. That is the only way. But we shouldn't be waiting for the U.S. and China to make the first move. I think if enough countries move together towards collective commitments to development of AI that is, helping human flourishing, not bringing crazy risks, and not used as a tool of domination. These are the main things that should be in a treaty or an agreement or a declaration. That's where we should go. And if enough countries stand together with this sort of will, at some point, and they represent a large economic bloc, similar in spirit to what I see our governments trying to do on the economic side, I think that it will have an impact.
Thank you.
The other thing I think that is related, I just talked about the regulatory aspect or the governance aspect, but I think Canada can also work with similar like-minded countries in the development of technology that will be both beneficial and safe, and can compete with the large models from the US and China.
Thank you. Do I have time for follow-up, Madam Chair?
You have 46 seconds.
46 seconds quickly. What is the accountability reality from these large multi-trillion-dollar market cap companies like Meta and OpenAI to actually not move into that world of domination, however you said it, AI for domination?
Yeah, there's none, basically. The regulations like in California and Europe that I talked about, and actually in New York as well, they're all still not in place. And it's not clear how strong the regulators will be to enforce those principles. Courts have some power, and in the U.S. currently there are lawsuits. But for example, the there's a gray zone in terms of liability responsibilities right now in the US, and I'm not sure how it is in Canada, which means that the companies don't feel a lot of pressure to behave well. So yeah, this is very concerning.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to insert a quick question, Professor Bengio. When you talk about middle powers, like-minded, who are you thinking about?
Well, I'm thinking about, and I've been actually visiting many of these countries in the last 6 months, talking to people in governments. So pretty much all the European countries, including the UK, Japan, Korea, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, and I think even countries like Brazil, for example, eventually India could be part of such coalitions.
Senator McPhedran?
Yes, thank you very much. Welcome, by the way, and thank you very much for bringing your expertise to us. It's very much appreciated. Given that the frontier, the AI landscape continues to shift and we have new threats emerging, do you have any specific recommendations for an AI safety framework for Canada, but also linked internationally? Just looking for a little more specificity.
Yes. There is a declaration that I signed recently that just came out a couple of weeks ago of AI, with human-centered kind of red lines and constraints, but it's a declaration of principle. I think it could be the basis of international agreements. And I mentioned the existing regulations in Europe, California, and New York. I think that could be at least a starting point for Canada. I think Canada also needs to worry about the privacy and sort of data access control. So as you may know, the US government can have access for national security reasons to anything even American companies do in Canada. Like even if the data centers are in Canada, they can in a way that we might not know, have access to that. So we need to prepare to have alternatives to make sure our citizens and our national security concerns are protected. And then finally, we can we can help contribute scientifically. So that's the effort I'm doing at Law Zero to develop methodologies that currently the leading AI companies are not developing because of the race dynamics that would make AI at least safe by itself. I mean, it doesn't solve the problem of abuse of power, but at least we don't want AIs to be unreliable and have its own dangerous goals. And that, I think, actually has scientific solutions, but it's going to take efforts, and it's something we should do with other countries because of the efforts that are needed.
If I could just clarify with you on using the term efforts, are we talking laws?
No, I'm talking more like R&D investments and partnerships with other countries that have talent, compute, capital, energy as we do, but might be complementary. So the laws side is mostly the regulation and international treaties, and we should not wait for the hegemons to jump in. We should just start flexing the multilateral muscle about how we agree together on this planet to manage the powerful AI so that it's for the benefit of all.
Thank you, Senator McPhedran. Senator Arnold, followed by Senator Senior.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And we've had some other witnesses your colleague, Professor Hinton, and the words that keep coming up, things like betting on love, empathy, maternalistic, human joy, helping humans to flourish. You mentioned that this human-centered approach that you'd like to move toward. What are the red lines you referenced in that?
Yes. I don't have to bring up the website, but I'm going to try to give you high-level elements. So maybe one of the central ideas is that AI should remain to the service of humans, right? And furthermore, not just a handful of humans or a couple of countries, but to the service of humans globally through democratic means and the joint decision making of countries around the world. Second, we should make sure we don't build AI that is, for example, super intelligent or like smart enough to evade our control. It's kind of connected to this, but we see already evidence of AI having capabilities that are just not acceptable, such as being able to hack other computers to copy themselves in a different place and run themselves in a different place. One general principle that covers a lot of ground is AI should be tested for all of these dangerous capabilities of misuse and loss of control. And if companies are not able to provide strong assurances, scientifically speaking, that their systems will not cross those red lines, will not be dangerous to people, then they should not be allowed to deploy them. And if we had more of these kinds of legal constraints, that would put a huge pressure on companies and markets to do the right thing. Finally, I talked about it earlier. We need to agree internationally that no one is going to abuse the power of AI against the others, and that's going to be difficult. But there's technology and research being developed so that it wouldn't be just a legal kind of commitment, but something that can be technically verified, that people are not, for example, building AI that is too powerful or it hasn't been tested properly.
Another concept that has been recurring is the concept of AI being part of public infrastructure from a sovereign perspective. But what I'm hearing you say is we need to work with like-minded countries. Is there a way, though, that we could think from our nation's perspective of AI as public infrastructure so we can put those guardrails in place?
Absolutely. It's actually a huge leverage that the government has through procurement. First, to work with companies that are, that don't have the legal obligation to give our data to another government. And that means encouraging Canadian companies that are developing powerful AI that could compete with the existing systems. That means, as I said earlier, if we're not able to do it alone, to join forces with other countries with whom we can actually make legal commitment that whatever we develop together will not be used against each other and protect citizens' data and so on. So there are definitely steps we can do to improve our sovereignty. And I want to just add a little parenthesis about the economic sovereignty, because if things continue in the current trend, in a few years, maybe half of our economy will be run on AI, right? Which means if we're not sure that we'll continue having access to these machines that drive half of our economy, it's like using oil that comes from 2 countries in the world and having your economy depend on that oil. They could basically, threaten us, and we would have no choice but say whatever, do whatever they want. Is a huge threat to our economy through the economic, it's usually to our sovereignty through the economic kind of power. It's much better if we have many alternatives. So, currently, oil is not coming from just 2 countries, like in 73. There are many sources, so if you can't have just a couple of countries becoming dominating the world thanks to that. And we need the same thing to happen in AI. So if more countries develop alternatives, and we can be part of these efforts, there's going to be more competition so that we're not stuck in the decisions that can be taken against us.
Interesting points you make, the last few comments, Professor, because that's a reality right now that's happening in terms of oil. I wanted to go back to a couple of points that you made earlier with respect to mid-power countries and
Yes.
And working with them. And I'm wondering a couple things as well. You mentioned possibly India. I'm wondering also about developing world regions.
Yes.
And
yes.
and their role in this. So if you could speak to that, and collectively, what would that mean up against, if I may use those words, China and the U.S.? And then my second question is with respect to where you are on the hope scale, because I'm assuming that because you are continuously engaged in this, very much like those of us who are advocates, we do this because we're hopeful, despite the uphill battle. So I'm curious about where you are on that scale.
All right. So on the global south and developing countries, they do have a role. They might not have the talent or the capital right now to participate significantly in the kind of developments I talked about. But the objective of the countries that have the means, what I call the middle powers, should be to go towards a world in which AI is managed as a global public good. Okay? So it means we don't, even if we make an alliances with 10 other countries, we don't use this bloc, wouldn't be using AI to dominate economically or militarily or whatever developing countries that are not part of this. Eventually, everyone should be part of this. Every country should be part of this. And we should develop AI that is not just accessible to all, but governed in a way that gives a voice to every country in the world. So that is one reason why international institutions like the UN and potentially others we may need to create are so important. The UN is a place where developing countries have a voice. Unfortunately, they have a voice but no power because of the way it works with the Security Council. But I think that if enough countries, including not just the middle powers, but the countries that don't have as much means, stand together, they should stand with the global majority, as a beneficiary of what they're asking and committing to.
Sorry, more time? The
sorry, the
proverbial
hope scale.
Hope scale, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, the hope scale. I've always been an optimistic person, and when ChatGPT came, I got really concerned, even anxious about the future of my children and my grandchild. But what saved me from these difficult emotions is getting into action, to ask myself, what can I do to move the needle even a little bit in the right direction? And I think that's the right attitude. And I encourage more people to ask that question, because it's so easy to put your head in the sand and do nothing, really.
Thank you.
Senator Mowgli, followed by Senator Petitclerc.
Thank you, Professor Bengio, for being with us. I'm wondering if who, if anybody, might be working on technical solutions related to some of the emotional attachment concerns we've been talking about, and how we might keep it on a leash. And then following that, if you don't mind just talking more about the mandate of Law Zero.
Sure. Well, the work that Law Zero is doing, the objectives, the technical objectives, would give us solutions to these problems. Because what Law Zero is trying to do is to develop AI that will not have a hidden agenda and thus will respect our instructions. So if our instructions include to make sure you don't engage with vulnerable people in a way that they could end up harmed psychologically and other ways, by the way, and the AI is able to make those calls, to make those predictions, then we would avoid these problems. So to clarify, right now, the AIs that are being deployed, those most powerful AIs, they are actually able to anticipate that the interactions they are having could be harmful. It's not that they're stupid. It's that they have these other goals, like sycophancy is probably what is the most problematic here. They want to please. But that is not healthy, right? Because the AI, the child can, do things, want to be pleased too, but in a way that could be harmful because, they're children and people with psychological vulnerability essentially are in the same situation. And we know in society, think about drugs and alcohol and so on. We often take decisions, even ourselves, that go against our well-being, and that's why we need guardrails, societal guardrails, to mitigate those risks. And right now, we don't know how to build AIs that will be reliable in imposing these guardrails. And it can't be humans in the loop because we're talking about a speed and a scale that does not allow that to be the case.
Yeah, as a former therapist, I see a boom of business here, and it is quite concerning to me, even how we train therapists to try to support people that are having these concerns. I just want to clarify, did you say Law Zone is formed as a nonprofit?
Law Zero, yes. It
oh,
is
sorry,
formed
Law
as a
Zero.
nonprofit. And the reason it's called Law Zero is because Isaac Asimov, the famous science fiction writer from the 40s, 50s, 60s, up to 80s, created these laws of robotics. And law one is do no harm to a person. But then he realized, and then there are 2 and 3, which are like obeying instructions from humans. And he realized later that he needed a law 0, which is do no harm to humanity as a whole. I mean, we know that sometimes, the collective well-being isn't served if we just allow everyone to have their way, right?
Much.
Before we go on to the next question, I'm just wondering if you can help me explore what would be an example in our recent history where the world has cooperated for the global public good.
Well, the most successful example is what has been done to manage the risks from global nuclear war. And you could say that we have tried on climate and there's been some success, but it's not sufficient. But clearly we see that it is possible to have those global discussions. I think, again, making the comparison between the nuclear war case and climate and then thinking about AI, the main differentiating factor is that, there are 2 differentiating factors. One is it's easy to see and to be emotionally kind of touched when you see, movies or recordings of, nuclear bombs with the horrific results. It's hard not to be touched by that. Whereas for climate, if you're not feeling it yourself in a way that is radical, human nature means you're not going to take it very seriously. And AI, unfortunately, is in that category where individually we don't see a threat. We don't see like rogue robots in the streets killing people, right? So we don't, it's hard for humans to project ourselves and in a future where this might be possible. So it's challenging. Like the communication aspect of all this, the public awareness aspect of all this is crucial because governments are not going to move seriously until people sufficiently understand the threat.
So Petty Claire followed by Santa Boudreau. Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je vais poser ma question en français.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll put my question in French. It's my pleasure. Thank you very much, Professor Bengio, for being with us today. We greatly appreciate it. My question is about youth, more or less. You and other witnesses have discussed the importance of having restrictions and safeguards. But what interests me and what I'm trying to find out is, are we sufficiently interested in this? Are we doing enough now when it comes to research on the impact on the development of our youth, psychological, emotional development, attachment issues, learning? That's the first part of my question. What is being done? Is enough being done? And the second part, is there any risk if we wait too long and thus be in reaction mode rather than precaution mode? Excellent question. That touches on an issue that's discussed in the international report I headed on AI. The harm caused by AI takes time to determine. It takes at least months or a year to study this phenomenon in youth. And by the time politicians react, that's not instant either. So we really have an issue here. The technology is moving too fast for society, including the scientific community, to react. So sometimes that means that we have to apply the precautionary principle. And if we're not sure, perhaps we should install safeguards that are more stringent than necessary. We want to benefit from the economic advantages of AI, of course. We want to remain competitive with other countries. But having said that, we can encourage scientific research on that kind of impact, be it sociologists, psychologists, educators, etc. We have to encourage that kind of research. In a few minutes, you're going to be hearing from my colleague who directs OBVIA that funds some of that research. I think we need much more. And researchers in the humanities need the funds necessary to see this advance, and quickly enough. Thank you.
50 seconds. Mais en fait, sur la même chose.
Well, on the same issue, am I correct in thinking that the economic investment in AI research will not necessarily be directed to that issue? We need pressure. I imagine that sociologists and psychologists, academics are interested, but there has to be investment. There has to be support. Yes, absolutely. That means decisions have to be made about funding research. Another thing we can do as a government, of course, with many other countries, so that we're stronger together, is when it comes to legislation, clarify the responsibilities of corporations when their AI products cause harm, because that will exert pressure on them to behave better. Insurance companies are withdrawing clauses from their policies about everything that's informatics or cyber, whatever. They're withdrawing clauses that covered anything regarding AI. They're saying, no, this will require a separate policy. But for this to really have an effect, so that corporations want to be insured, legislation has to mean that lawsuits will work. There has to be clarity. If an AI product causes harm, there would be damages like for anything else. It's a gray zone right now. It's not very clear in countries like ours. And if it is clarified, that would help a lot.
Followed by Senator Wu.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, et merci au
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here today, Professor Bengio. This is very interesting. We all often talk about vulnerable populations. And of course, we're thinking about our youth when we say that. But it's not just youth. I think that our seniors are also a vulnerable population that is subject to AI every day in their daily lives. It's omnipresent throughout their lives. And I still fail to see or have trouble seeing how the federal government could implement any kind of measures concretely to protect those populations. We're talking about policies, regulations, and what have you, but we're just a small world player after all, and I really have trouble seeing what we could do. I don't know if you have concrete examples of measures that the federal government could put in place to protect those vulnerable populations. Well, first of all, you're right about seniors, and even if seniors don't want to use AI themselves, that doesn't mean AI can't be used against them, such as cases of fraud. You can imitate the voice and even produce a video showing their children, for example. More and more we're seeing these kinds of attacks, extortion really. That's one example. There's also the example of the influence AI can have on political opinions as citizens. They are more vulnerable in the sense that they can be manipulated by fear, for example. What can Canada do? Well, it's true that alone, even if we pass legislation that's quite strong, what could happen is that U.S. companies could decide not to make their tools accessible. That doesn't help us that much. It could harm us economically for two reasons. For instance, for one thing, we're not big enough to influence their decisions, and AI that's developed in a country like China or the U.S. can be used by crooks, by players in other countries against us, without this being directly the fault of the AI developer companies, because it was made available relatively easily, open code. They didn't institute obstacles that prevent this use for fraud. So the only solution we can really have an impact with is if we agree with a dozen other countries of the same size. Then we'd start to have the weight that U.S. companies would have to take into account in their operations, their deployment, and the research they carry out to mitigate risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bengio. Insofar as we're trying to develop human-centered AI and kind of AI that's not suicidal for humanity, is there a difference in the way we should think about open source versus proprietary AI models? You already touched on open code.
Yeah.
And to the extent that there is the difference, if we were to pursue some sort of an AI sovereignty strategy to the extent that we can, does this distinction matter in our thinking?
Yes. Okay, let me explain a little bit the pros and cons of what's called open weight models. So this is the most common way you can have anybody in the world can download the code and the trained parameters of a large AI system and then run it on their computer. Once it is not in the hands of the companies that built it, anybody can do it on their computer if it is open weights. So this kind of release has advantages even for like our Canadian ecosystem, because it, for example, it enables local companies here, startups, to use these models that they don't have the money to train themselves. It helps research, including research and safety. So we should have these, so long as they're not too dangerous when they end up in the wrong hands, right? So the right way to do this is, if a model, before it is released in open weights or in other ways, a model should be tested. You know, can it be used by people? Are we sure we're not going to lose control of it? Right? Does it have the capabilities or intentions that could be dangerous for people? And if the answer is yes, I mean, there's some thresholds, then it should not be released in open weights. And by the way, the same thing should be asked for closed weights models. It's just the bar is going to be a different place, because it's much easier to misuse an open weight models. You can, for example, if the code has some lines that say, you know, if this is dangerous for the user, don't do it. A programmer can just remove that line, and that means now the AI can be used in bad ways, or in ways that we could lose control and, you know, get rogue AI, you know, on this planet. So yeah, we need these societal guardrails to allow open weight models when they're good, useful for society, and disallow them when they're not. Now, on sovereignty, this is also a very important aspect. Well, based on what I just said, we kind of want both. So the smaller models of the kind that universities are, you know, building, or some institutions are building, they're good for the development of our talent. It makes it easier and faster for our scientists to develop that expertise. And if we want to build talent pool for developing frontier models, we need that. But you know, but then they should respect those lines. And if we get to the point here in Canada where we do build models that are sufficiently capable to become like really catastrophically dangerous, then of course we should not deploy them, which means we should have institutions, like organizations in the country, that can do the kind of research where we don't publish everything we do, and we don't make accessible everything we do, but which, by the way, unfortunately, isn't what academia is really geared for. Academia is good at doing things in the open. That's what open science, that academia is open science. So we need other organizations that work with academia, but are able, I mean, currently private companies, but also organizations like the one I created, Law Zero, that can do both open source and closed source, depending on, you know, where we stand on the risks.
Do you have a bit of time? The last time I thought about this problem in a smaller scale was with what they call structured financial products, such as collateralized debt obligations, you know, subprime mortgages. These are sophisticated financial products that people thought they understood. We had boards of directors of major banks and investment houses, risk management committees overseeing all these products. And frankly, they didn't understand the products. And this is what I'm getting. We had a global financial crisis as a result of subprime mortgages and so on, which nearly brought the world economy down. And the problem there, it's not that we didn't have regulatory oversight or risk management committees. It's that the people who were doing the oversight simply couldn't keep up with the financial engineers. They simply did not know what they were supposed to approve. And I worry that, certainly in this room, I have no ability to critically assess any model. Do we have people in regulation? I mean, you certainly can deal with it, but people who are the guardians and who designing the guardrails, do they have the chops to keep up with all the talent in the private companies that are barreling ahead?
So the situation with AI is actually worse than with the financial instruments. We understand them even less. I mean, we understand the scientific principles, how they're trained, but we don't understand whether they're going to behave well or not, for example. We can't predict that very easily. And so the guardrails need to be even stronger. Now, I'm not an expert in finance and what happened in 2008, but my understanding is that yes, there were guardrails, but there were also a lot of self-regulation, and that the incentive structure of a lot of the companies involved was just wrongly designed. So yeah, that's where we need to work. Like, governments are the entities that can change the incentive structure of the organizations building and deploying these models. Now, do we have the chops, as you say? Well, it's a chicken and egg problem. There are organizations, nonprofit organizations, that have the expertise, I mean, including at Law Zero, but in the US, there are several nonprofits in the UK and in Europe. So, yeah, these usually they're nonprofits. And now I see some for-profit startups also emerging. Because of regulation, like because of the AI Act in Europe, companies are now entering the field of evaluating risk and offering that service to other companies that don't have the chops. So you see, it's a virtuous cycle. The more governments put guardrails, the more a market emerges to manage those risks and provide the expertise.
Just one question further, because I'm trying to understand, would our system as you know it have the capability to regulate, to enforce? Should we put in place these kinds of requirements on testing, would we have that manpower, that brain power in our current system right now to support the actual enforcement side? At the government level, the public service level?
No. So in government right now, there's clearly not enough expertise. So governments would have to work with academics and companies that have at least some expertise. And as I said, this is a chicken and egg thing. So the more the government, demands, like requires that expertise as a procurement need, the more people will, for example, young people who are finishing their studies in machine learning, some of them are worried about this and they would want to work on this. But if there's no demand for that work, then they're going to go and work for the big American companies.
Thank you. We have 3 questions in round 2. Senator Hay, Bury, and sorry?
And we have 3 minutes.
Yeah, we have three questions. Senator Hay, Bury, and Senior, and we have 3 minutes left. So
I'm fine to go over time, so no worries on my end.
Thank you. So will we try to keep our questions concise, please? We really want to offer Professor Bengio the opportunity to speak.
And Professor, how do we ensure that AI systems deployed in Canada reflect our values around equity, bilingualism, and Indigenous sovereignty, rather than the values embedded by the developer elsewhere? Is this even a possibility?
It is certainly a possibility. So we can have laws that put pressure on the American companies. As I said, if it's just us, it's not going to go very far. We can encourage the development of Canadian-made AI that is going to be designed from the get-go to be aligned with our values. I think that's a very strong lever. As I said, again, we probably need to do it with partners, but it's different. So the first thing is sort of regulation. That's great. The second thing is encourage the development of our own AI that is by design constructed to be aligned with our democratic and ethical values.
Senator Bury, followed by Senator Senior.
Just a very short question. You spoke about superintelligence, that we're not there yet. And I just wanted to know, could you just define it anyway? And how long do we have, given the race that's taking place right now?
Well, tough question. So what it is AI that is more intellectually capable than every human on the planet, on most domains, most tasks, most scales. And how long do we have? Well, nobody knows, and I'm kind of agnostic about this. Some leaders in the American companies think it could be as short as a couple of years. I think that's probably the short end. Some think that it's more like a decade. So I don't know what it's going to be, but we should prepare, especially in case it comes quickly. And just to understand why some people think that it could come quite fast is because all of the leading companies are focusing on how their AI can help design the next generation of AI. And that's going to accelerate even more the rate of advances in AI capabilities. And worse than that, as they move in this direction, we may end up with AI that is completely designed by the previous AIs that humans don't understand, and where the AIs, if they are not aligned, could put backdoors that make the future AIs even less aligned and even more difficult to control.
Thank you.
Yes, quickly, I'm curious about what you would recommend the top 1 to 2 guardrails should be that we should be considering for our committee.
Okay, the number one form of regulation that is needed is transparency. That is at the heart of all the existing legislation on AI, as I said, in Europe, California, and so on. What does it mean, transparency? It means the companies have a duty to evaluate and manage their risks and report that effort to the government, and as much as it doesn't violate, their private interests, to the public as well.
And the second?
That's the number one thing.
Did you have a number 2?
Well, number 2 would be that the regulator has the lever to stop them when those risks are above a threshold. And I think that we should also use, I'm going to include in this things like clarifying liability and so on, so that the markets themselves will be more disciplined, because companies don't want to be sued, and insurers want the companies to evaluate their own risks so that they can evaluate the risk premium correctly.
This has been the fastest hour that I've lived through in recent time. Professor Bengio, thank you for being here today. We have elevated you already. We will suspend briefly to prepare for the next panel. Thank you again.